The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew it was trouble before I even opened the envelope, because nothing good ever comes from the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. My name is Andrew Ingram, and I had lived peacefully in my modest 3-bedroom ranch house in suburban Colorado Springs for exactly 3 years before the HOA decided to make my life a living hell. The letter informed me that I was being fined $500 for violating Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines, which apparently prohibited outdoor clotheslines. I stood there in my driveway, still holding my morning coffee, reading the words over and over again like they might somehow rearrange themselves into something sensible. I had installed a simple retractable clothesline in my backyard 2 weeks earlier. Nothing fancy, just a practical solution to cut down on my electricity bill and reduce my environmental footprint. The Colorado sun was perfect for drying clothes naturally, and I had been enjoying the fresh smell of sun-dried sheets and towels. My backyard was fenced, mostly private, and the clothesline was barely visible from the street. Yet somehow, it had caught the attention of Patricia Henderson, the HOA president and the most notorious busybody in our entire subdivision. I walked back inside and called my neighbor, Marcus, who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for over a decade. He answered on the 3rd ring, already sounding exhausted even though it was only 9 in the morning. "Let me guess," Marcus said. "Patricia found something to complain about." "How did you know?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Because it is Tuesday, and Patricia always sends out violation notices on Mondays for weekend inspections." "What did she get you for?" "My clothesline. I put up a clothesline in my backyard." Marcus let out a long, heavy sigh. "Yeah, she is obsessed with those. Got Mrs. Chen 2 years ago for the same thing. Cost her $800 because she refused to take it down immediately. $800 for drying clothes outside." "Welcome to Meadowbrook Hills, where common sense goes to die," Marcus said with a bitter laugh. I thanked Marcus for the information and immediately started researching. I was not the type to just roll over and accept something that felt fundamentally wrong. After about an hour of digging through Colorado state laws, I discovered something interesting. Colorado had passed a right to dry law back in 2008, specifically prohibiting HOAs from completely banning clotheslines and similar solar drying devices. The law stated that while HOAs could impose reasonable restrictions, they could not outright prohibit residents from using clotheslines. Armed with this information, I drafted a response letter to the HOA. I kept it professional but firm, citing the Colorado statute and explaining that while I was willing to discuss reasonable accommodations, the fine was not legally enforceable. I sent it via certified mail that same afternoon, feeling pretty good about my research and response. 3 days later, Patricia Henderson showed up at my door. She was exactly what you would imagine when you pictured an HOA president on a power trip. Mid-50s, with a severe blonde bob that looked like it required a weekly appointment to maintain its aggressive precision. She wore a crisp white blouse tucked into khaki pants, and she carried a leather-bound folder that I assumed contained all the documentation she needed to make my life miserable. "Mr. Ingram," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I received your letter, and I am here to inform you that you are mistaken about the law." "May I see your interpretation?" I asked, keeping my voice level. She opened her folder and pulled out a printed document. "The HOA has the right to maintain community standards. Your clothesline is an eyesore and violates our aesthetic guidelines. My clothesline is in my backyard, behind a 6-foot privacy fence. You can barely see it from anywhere except my own property. Our rules clearly state no outdoor clotheslines, Patricia said, her voice taking on that particular tone that suggested she was used to people simply complying with whatever she said. And Colorado state law clearly protects my right to dry my clothes using solar energy. The HOA cannot completely prohibit clotheslines. You can impose reasonable restrictions, but you cannot ban them outright. Patricia's face tightened. I suggest you remove that clothesline within the next 7 days, or the fine will increase to $1,000. I suggest the HOA Board review Colorado Revised Statute 3833.3209.5, I replied, because I am not removing anything, and I am not paying this fine. She left without another word, but I could see the anger radiating off her as she walked back to her silver Lexus SUV. I knew this was not over, not by a long shot. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more letters from the HOA. Each one threatened increasing fines and potential legal action. The amounts had escalated from $500 to $1,000 to $2,000. They were trying to intimidate me into compliance, but I had done my homework. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, a sharp woman named Jennifer Ortiz who had an office in downtown Colorado Springs. Jennifer reviewed my case over coffee at a local shop near her office. She read through all the correspondence, examined photos of my clothesline, and reviewed the HOA bylaws. They do not have a leg to stand on, she said finally. The right to dry law is very clear. They can ask you to use certain types of clotheslines, restrict the hours you use it, or require it to be in your backyard, but they cannot ban it completely. What you have is reasonable, it is not visible from the street, and you are well within your rights. So what do I do about these fines? You ignore them. They are not legally enforceable. However, I would recommend sending one more letter, this time from my office, making it clear that you know your rights and that any further harassment will result in legal action against the HOA. Jennifer drafted a letter that afternoon. It was professional but unmistakably firm, outlining the specific statute that protected my rights and warning that any continued attempt to fine me would be considered harassment under Colorado law. She sent it to the HOA board, Patricia Henderson, and the management company that administered our HOA. For about a week, things were quiet. I thought maybe they had finally backed off. I continued using my clothesline, enjoying the way my clothes smelled after a day in the Colorado sunshine. My electricity bill had dropped noticeably, and I felt good about reducing my carbon footprint. Then I got home from work one evening to find my clothesline had been cut down. Someone had come into my backyard and deliberately destroyed my property. The rope had been cut cleanly with scissors or a knife, and the entire setup was lying on the ground. I was furious. This was not just about HOA rules anymore. This was vandalism, and it was criminal. I immediately called the police. An officer arrived within 20 minutes, a young guy named Officer Davidson, who took my statement and photographed the damage. He seemed sympathetic, but told me that without witnesses or security camera footage, it would be difficult to prove who had done it. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I said, explaining the ongoing dispute with the HOA. "That is circumstantial, but I will include it in my report. I would recommend installing security cameras if you plan to put up another clothesline." That is exactly what I did. The next day, I went to a home security store and invested in a comprehensive camera system. I installed cameras covering my backyard, side yards, and front entrance. Then I went to the hardware store and bought materials for an even better clothesline setup. This time, I installed a permanent retractable system with stainless steel hardware that could handle heavy loads. Jennifer suggested I also file a formal complaint with the management company and send a police report copy to the HOA board. We were building a paper trail that would be useful if this escalated further. 2 weeks passed without incident. I used my clothesline regularly, and my security cameras recorded everything. I was beginning to think that maybe the vandalism had been a one-time thing, possibly even done by someone who was not officially connected to the HOA board. Then I caught her. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was working from home. My security system sent an alert to my phone that someone was in my backyard. I pulled up the camera feed and watched in real time as Patricia Henderson let herself through my back gate and walked directly toward my clothesline, carrying a large pair of garden shears. I grabbed my phone and called the police while simultaneously recording everything on my security system. I watched as Patricia began cutting through the rope again, methodically destroying my property for the second time. She seemed completely confident that she would not get caught, taking her time and making sure to cut through multiple sections of the line. Officer Davidson arrived again, this time with a partner. I showed them the live footage, and we went around to the backyard together. Patricia was just finishing up when we came through the gate. The look on her face when she saw the police was something I would never forget, a mixture of shock, indignation, and dawning horror. "Madam, I need you to put down the shears," Officer Davidson said calmly. "This is HOA business," Patricia said, her voice shrill. "This man is violating community guidelines. Madam, you are on private property and you are destroying someone else's belongings. That is criminal mischief. I need you to put down the shears now." Patricia finally complied, but she continued to argue. He was warned multiple times. He refused to comply with HOA regulations. HOA regulations do not give you the right to trespass and vandalize someone's property, Officer Davidson said. "I am going to need you to come with us." Watching Patricia Henderson get arrested in my backyard was surreal. She continued protesting all the way to the patrol car, insisting that she was within her rights as HOA president. The officers were professional but firm, and eventually she was placed in the back of the cruiser and driven away. I provided the police with copies of all the security footage, both from this incident and from the previous vandalism that I had not been able to prove at the time. The timestamps and clear video evidence showed Patricia entering my property without permission on 2 separate occasions and deliberately destroying my clothesline. The story spread through Meadowbrook Hills faster than a wildfire. Marcus called me within an hour of Patricia's arrest, having heard about it from 3 different neighbors already. The community was divided. Some people thought Patricia had gone too far and deserved what she got. Others felt I was being difficult and should have just followed the rules to keep the peace. A few days later, I received a call from Robert Mills, the vice president of the HOA board. He sounded nervous and apologetic, a stark contrast to Patricia's aggressive approach. "Mr. Ingram, I want to apologize for how this situation was handled," he said. "The board had no idea Patricia was taking such extreme measures. We are calling an emergency meeting to address this situation and review our policies regarding clotheslines and other environmentally friendly practices." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I want to be clear that I am within my legal rights, and I expect the HOA to acknowledge that formally." "Absolutely. We are consulting with our attorney, and I think you will find that we are going to make some changes. Would you be willing to attend the board meeting next week? We would like to hear your perspective." I agreed, though I brought Jennifer Ortiz with me as my attorney. The meeting was held in the community center, and it was packed. Apparently, the Patricia situation had stirred up a lot of interest in HOA governance, and many residents wanted to see how the board would handle things moving forward. Robert Mills opened the meeting by acknowledging what had happened and announcing that Patricia Henderson had resigned from the board effective immediately. There was a mixture of gasps and murmurs throughout the room. He then invited me to speak. I stood up, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on me. I never wanted any of this to become such a big issue, I began. I put up a clothesline to save money on electricity and reduce my environmental impact. It is in my backyard, behind a privacy fence, and barely visible to anyone. Colorado law protects my right to dry my clothes using solar energy, and the HOA had no legal basis to fine me or demand I remove it. What about community standards? Someone shouted from the back. I recognized the voice as belonging to Donald Fletcher, one of Patricia's allies on the board. Community standards are important, I acknowledged, but they cannot override state law. The right to dry statute was passed specifically because clotheslines are an environmentally responsible choice. HOAs across Colorado have learned to accommodate this. Our HOA can do the same. Jennifer stood up next. I would like to add that the right to dry law allows for reasonable restrictions. The HOA could, for example, require that clotheslines be placed in backyards rather than front yards, or that they be of a certain type or color. What they cannot do is ban them entirely or fine residents for using them in a reasonable manner. The discussion went on for over an hour. Several residents shared their own frustrations with HOA rules that seemed arbitrary or outdated. Others expressed concern about property values and maintaining the neighborhood's appearance. Eventually, the board agreed to form a committee to review the community guidelines and bring them into compliance with state law. More importantly, they formally rescinded all fines against me and issued a written apology. They also agreed to reimburse me for the cost of replacing my clothesline twice and for the security system I had installed. Meanwhile, Patricia Henderson was facing legal consequences. She was charged with 2 counts of criminal mischief and 1 count of trespassing. The prosecutor offered her a plea deal that included paying restitution, performing community service, and attending anger management classes. From what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she accepted the deal rather than risk a trial. The incident became something of a local news story. A reporter from the Colorado Springs Gazette interviewed me about the right to dry law and HOA overreach. The story ran with the headline, "Homeowner Stands Up to HOA in Clothesline Dispute," and it generated a lot of discussion online and in the community. I received messages from people all over Colorado, and even from other states, sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was eye-opening to see how many people felt bullied or controlled by their homeowners associations. Some of the stories were far worse than mine, involving tens of thousands of dollars in fines and legal fees over issues that seemed trivial. The attention also caught the eye of state legislators. A representative from Colorado Springs, Maria Sanchez, reached out to me about potentially strengthening the right to dry law and other protections against HOA overreach. She invited me to testify at a committee hearing about proposed legislation that would give homeowners more protection and limit HOA authority in certain areas. I took a day off work to drive to the state capitol in Denver. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, but there was something powerful about sitting at the witness table and sharing my story with elected officials who could actually make changes. I explained what had happened, showed photographs of my clothesline and backyard, and talked about the harassment and vandalism I had experienced. This is not just about clotheslines, I told the committee. This is about whether homeowners have basic rights on their own property. This is about environmental responsibility and not being punished for making sustainable choices. And this is about HOA boards that forget they are supposed to serve the community, not control it. The committee members asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely concerned about HOA accountability. Representative Sanchez thanked me for my testimony and said the committee would be moving forward with legislation to clarify and strengthen homeowner rights. Back in Meadowbrook Hills, things were slowly changing. The committee formed to review the community guidelines met several times, and they invited input from all residents. I participated in a few meetings, along with Marcus and several other neighbors who had concerns about various rules. The revised guidelines that eventually emerged were much more reasonable. Clotheslines and other solar drying devices were explicitly permitted in backyards, with only minimal restrictions related to safety and structural integrity. The guidelines also addressed other issues like vegetable gardens, solar panels, and electric vehicle charging stations, all of which had previously been in legal gray areas. Robert Mills was elected as the new HOA president, and he brought a much more collaborative and less antagonistic approach to the role. He acknowledged that the previous board had been too focused on control and not enough on community building. "We live in one of the most beautiful parts of Colorado," Robert said at a community meeting. "We should be encouraging people to enjoy their properties and make environmentally responsible choices, not punishing them for it." The changes went beyond just the written guidelines. The whole culture of the HOA shifted. Board meetings became more transparent and less combative. Residents felt more comfortable asking questions or raising concerns without fear of retaliation. It was not perfect. There were still disagreements and occasional conflicts, but it was a massive improvement over the Patricia Henderson era. As for Patricia herself, she largely disappeared from community life. She still lived in Meadowbrook Hills, but she kept to herself and avoided neighborhood events. I saw her occasionally at the grocery store or driving through the neighborhood, and we would exchange awkward nods but nothing more. I did not take any pleasure in how things had turned out for her, but I also did not regret standing up for my rights. My clothesline became something of a symbol in the neighborhood. Several other residents installed their own after the guidelines changed, and I would sometimes see sheets and towels fluttering in backyards throughout Meadowbrook Hills. Marcus put up an elaborate system with multiple lines, and he joked that he was making up for lost time. The security cameras I had installed stayed up, which turned out to be useful in ways I had not anticipated. A few months after the Patricia incident, the cameras caught a group of teenagers trying to break into my detached garage. The footage helped police identify and arrest them before they could burglarize other homes in the area. My neighbors started asking me for recommendations on security systems, and several of them installed their own cameras. The legal case against Patricia concluded about 6 months after her arrest. She pleaded guilty to the charges and received the sentence the prosecutor had offered: restitution, community service, and anger management classes. She paid me $800 to cover the cost of my damaged property and the security system. The money was fine, but more than that, I appreciated the formal acknowledgement that what she had done was wrong. Jennifer Ortiz became something of a local expert on HOA law after my case. She told me she had received dozens of inquiries from homeowners dealing with similar disputes. Some were about clotheslines, but others involved solar panels, vegetable gardens, paint colors, holiday decorations, and a whole range of issues where HOAs were overstepping their authority. Jennifer was passionate about homeowner rights, and she offered to help me if I ever wanted to organize a workshop or information session for other residents. We ended up doing exactly that. About 8 months after the Clothesline incident, Jennifer and I hosted a Know Your Rights workshop at the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center. We invited everyone in the neighborhood, and about 40 people showed up. Jennifer gave a presentation on Colorado HOA law, homeowner rights, and how to effectively challenge unreasonable rules. I shared my story as a case study, and we opened the floor for questions. The response was overwhelming. People had so many questions and so many of their own stories about feeling powerless in the face of HOA rules. We ended up running 2 hours over our planned schedule because people kept asking questions and sharing experiences. Several attendees asked if we could make this a regular event, maybe quarterly or semi-annually, to keep people informed and engaged. One of the attendees was Elizabeth Adams, a woman about my age who lived 3 streets over. After the workshop, she came up to thank me for standing up to the HOA. "I have been wanting to install solar panels for years," Elizabeth said, "but I was afraid the HOA would fight me on it. After seeing what you went through and how you handled it, I think I am finally going to do it." "The law protects solar panels even more strongly than clotheslines," Jennifer told her. "If you need help navigating the process, give me a call." Elizabeth did install her solar panels, and she did face some resistance from a couple of board members who were holdovers from the Patricia era. But with Jennifer's help and the support of other residents who had attended the workshop, Elizabeth got her panels installed without any fines or major complications. Her success inspired 3 other homeowners to install solar panels over the next year. The whole experience taught me a lot about standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. I could have just taken down my clothesline after the first notice. It would have been easier, and I would have avoided all the conflict and stress. But sometimes the easy path is not the right path. Sometimes you have to fight for principles that matter, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. My electricity bills stayed lower thanks to using the clothesline regularly. I calculated that I was saving about $30 a month on average, which added up to over $300 a year. That might not sound like a lot, but over time it was significant. More importantly, I felt good about reducing my energy consumption and doing something positive for the environment. The clothesline also became a conversation starter with neighbors. People would see my laundry hanging out and stop to chat about energy costs, environmental issues, or their own experiences with the HOA. These casual conversations helped build connections in the neighborhood that might not have happened otherwise. Representative Sanchez's legislation moved through the Colorado State House over the following year. It was amended and debated and negotiated, which is how the legislative process works, but the core principles remained intact. The bill strengthened protections for homeowners who wanted to install solar panels, clotheslines, electric vehicle charging stations, and other environmentally sustainable features. It also required more transparency in HOA governance and gave homeowners clearer paths to challenge unfair rules or fines. I was invited back to Denver when the bill passed the State House. Representative Sanchez gave me a copy of the enrolled bill and thanked me for sharing my story. "Sometimes it takes one person standing up to create change that helps everyone," she said. "You should be proud of what you started." The bill still needed to pass the state Senate and be signed by the governor, but Representative Sanchez was optimistic about its chances. She said there was broad bipartisan support for homeowner rights and environmental sustainability, which gave the legislation a good chance of becoming law. Back in Meadowbrook Hills, the HOA continued to evolve in positive directions. Robert Mills and the new board members implemented several reforms that made the organization more democratic and less heavy-handed. They created an online portal where residents could submit maintenance requests, review financial reports, and participate in discussions about community issues. They also established term limits for board positions to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. The neighborhood became more pleasant in subtle ways that were hard to quantify but easy to feel. People seemed less stressed about potential HOA violations. Neighbors were friendlier and more willing to help each other out. The community events like the summer barbecue and holiday party were better attended and more enjoyable. Marcus told me one evening while we were having beers in his backyard, "You know, I was seriously considering moving before all this happened. Patricia made living here miserable, but now I actually like this place again. I am glad you fought back instead of just rolling over." "I am glad too," I said, "though I would have preferred not to have my property vandalized twice." "Small price to pay for dethroning a tyrant," Marcus said with a laugh. I kept in touch with Jennifer Ortiz, who continued to build her practice around HOA law. She told me that my case had opened doors for her professionally, and she was now representing clients across Colorado in various disputes. Some cases were similar to mine, while others involved more complex issues like HOA foreclosures, special assessments, and construction defects. Jennifer was passionate about her work and felt like she was making a real difference in people's lives. "Most of my clients are not difficult people," Jennifer explained over lunch one day. "They are regular homeowners who got sideways with an HOA board on a power trip. They need someone to help them understand their rights and stand up to bullies. It is really satisfying work." Elizabeth Adams and I became friends after her solar panel installation. She was a teacher at a local elementary school, and she was passionate about environmental education. She invited me to speak to her 5th grade class about sustainability and standing up for what you believe in. I was nervous about talking to a room full of 10-year-olds, but they asked great questions and seemed genuinely interested. One kid asked me, "Were you scared when the HOA lady kept threatening you?" "Yes," I admitted. "I was scared and I was stressed, but I knew I was right and I knew I had the law on my side. Sometimes you have to do things that are scary because they are important." Another kid asked, "Did you feel bad when she got arrested?" That was a harder question. "I felt bad that it came to that," I said carefully. "I wish she had just followed the rules and respected my rights, but she made choices that had consequences. I do not feel guilty for defending myself and my property." Teaching that class reminded me that this story was about more than just me and my clothesline. It was about principles that mattered: property rights, environmental responsibility, standing up to bullies, and the idea that individuals can create change even when facing institutional power. The case also had unexpected professional benefits. My employer, a mid-sized tech company in Colorado Springs, asked me to give a presentation at a company meeting about the importance of sustainability and taking stands on principles. They used my story as an example of living the company's stated values about environmental responsibility and integrity. It was a little embarrassing to have my personal life become a corporate case study, but it was also validating to know that people saw something meaningful in what I had done. About a year after the initial incident, Representative Sanchez's bill became law. The governor signed it in a small ceremony at the Capitol, and I was invited to attend. Standing there with other advocates and legislators, watching the governor sign the legislation, was a powerful moment. This law would protect thousands of Colorado homeowners who wanted to make sustainable choices without fear of HOA retaliation. The governor spoke briefly before signing the bill. "This legislation represents Colorado values," she said. "We believe in property rights, environmental stewardship, and common sense. Homeowners should not be punished for hanging their laundry out to dry or installing solar panels. This bill ensures that HOAs cannot override state policy on issues that matter to all Coloradans." After the ceremony, several people came up to thank me for speaking up and sharing my story. One woman told me she had been fighting her HOA over a vegetable garden for 3 years, and this new law would finally protect her right to grow food on her own property. A man said he had wanted to install an electric vehicle charger, but had been afraid of HOA pushback, and now he felt confident moving forward. These conversations reinforced something I had learned throughout this whole experience. Individual actions matter. One person standing up for what is right can create ripples that spread far beyond their immediate situation. My clothesline dispute had seemed like such a small, personal issue when it started, but it had ultimately contributed to changing state law and helping thousands of people. Back home in Meadowbrook Hills, my clothesline still hung in my backyard, now joined by similar setups throughout the neighborhood. On sunny days, I would look around and see laundry fluttering in the Colorado breeze on multiple properties. It was a small thing, but it represented something bigger: freedom, sustainability, and community. Patricia Henderson remained largely out of sight. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had completed her community service and anger management classes. Someone said they had seen her at a different grocery store across town, apparently avoiding the one where she might run into neighbors. I hoped she had learned something from the whole experience, but I had no way of knowing. Our paths simply did not cross anymore. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA continued to function much more smoothly under Robert Mills's leadership. The board made decisions transparently, communicated clearly with residents, and focused on genuine community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. Property values remained stable, the neighborhood looked good, and people were generally happy. It turned out that you could have an effective HOA without being tyrannical about minor issues. I continued using my clothesline regularly, especially during Colorado's sunny spring and summer months. There was something deeply satisfying about hanging wet laundry in the morning and taking down sun-dried, fresh-smelling clothes in the afternoon. It connected me to older, simpler ways of living while also being a modern environmental choice. Plus, every time I used it, I saved money and reduced my carbon footprint. Jennifer Ortiz and I collaborated on an article for a state bar journal about HOA law and homeowner rights. The article detailed my case and several others, providing guidance for attorneys dealing with similar disputes. We argued that the trend toward overly restrictive HOA rules was problematic, and that state legislatures needed to provide clear protections for homeowners. The article generated some discussion in legal circles and even got picked up by a couple of news outlets. Marcus and I stayed good friends, bonding over our shared experience of living under Patricia Henderson's regime and enjoying the much better atmosphere under the new board. We would have dinner occasionally, and he would joke about the clothesline that launched 1,000 reforms. His wife, Sarah, thought the whole story was hilarious and made me promise to tell it at their next dinner party. I did tell the story at that dinner party, along with 8 other neighbors who wanted to hear the full saga. By that point, it had been almost 2 years since the original fine, and the story had taken on a kind of legendary quality in the neighborhood. People who had moved to Meadowbrook Hills after the incident would hear about it and seek me out to get the real version of events. Elizabeth Adams started a neighborhood sustainability group that met monthly to discuss environmental issues and share tips for reducing carbon footprints. The group covered everything from composting to electric vehicles to energy-efficient home improvements. My clothesline experience was discussed at the first meeting as an example of how individual choices could face institutional resistance but ultimately prevail. The security cameras I had installed continued to provide peace of mind and practical benefits. They helped solve another attempted burglary in the neighborhood, this time at a house 2 blocks away. The would-be burglars had walked past my house first, and my cameras caught clear images of their faces and the vehicle they were driving. The police used that footage to identify and arrest them before they could victimize more homes. Several neighbors asked me to help them install similar security systems, and I found myself becoming the unofficial neighborhood expert on home security technology. It was not something I had planned, but it felt good to help people protect their property and feel safer in their homes. My relationship with the HOA board remained cordial but not particularly close. I attended meetings occasionally when there were issues that interested me, and I stayed informed about board decisions, but I did not seek to join the board or become heavily involved in HOA politics. I had made my point, fought my fight, and now I was content to live peacefully and use my clothesline without harassment. The whole experience changed how I thought about homeownership and community involvement. Before the clothesline dispute, I had been fairly passive about HOA issues. I paid my dues, followed the rules I was aware of, and did not think much about governance or policy. Now I understood that homeowners need to stay engaged and informed. HOAs can do good work, maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and handling collective issues, but they can also overreach and abuse their power if residents do not pay attention. I made a point of encouraging other residents to attend board meetings and participate in HOA decisions. Democracy only works when people engage with it, whether at the national level or the neighborhood level. Too often, HOA boards end up controlled by a small group of people, sometimes people with too much time on their hands and not enough perspective, because most homeowners cannot be bothered to participate. One evening, about 2.5 years after the initial incident, I was taking down laundry from my clothesline when my phone rang. It was Representative Sanchez calling to tell me that she was working on new legislation to further strengthen homeowner protections, and she wanted my input. We have been getting reports of HOAs retaliating against homeowners who exercise their rights under the law we passed, she explained, fining them for other petty violations, making their lives difficult in subtle ways. I want to introduce a bill that would create real penalties for HOA retaliation. I thought about my experience and the stories I had heard from other homeowners. That makes sense, I said. Patricia Henderson vandalized my property twice before she got caught. Most HOAs are probably smarter about retaliation. They find other ways to harass people they do not like. Exactly. Would you be willing to testify again if we move forward with this legislation? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. Over the following months, I worked with Representative Sanchez and her staff to help shape the anti-retaliation legislation. We looked at examples from other states, consulted with legal experts, and gathered stories from homeowners who had faced retaliation. The bill that eventually emerged would require HOAs to demonstrate legitimate, non-retaliatory reasons for any enforcement action taken within a year of a homeowner exercising protected rights. It also created a state-level mechanism for homeowners to file complaints about HOA abuse. The legislation faced more opposition than the previous bill. HOA management companies and some board members argued that it would make it too difficult to enforce legitimate rules. But homeowner advocates, environmental groups, and civil liberties organizations supported it strongly. The debate played out in committee hearings, news articles, and community discussions across Colorado. I testified again, this time with even more confidence than before. I explained how my simple decision to hang laundry outside had led to thousands of dollars in threatened fines, harassment, and ultimately vandalism. I described the chilling effect that HOA retaliation can have on homeowners who might otherwise exercise their rights. No one should have to install security cameras and hire a lawyer just to dry their clothes in the sun, I told the committee. But that is what I had to do, and I was lucky because I had the resources and the determination to fight back. Many homeowners do not. They just give in, even when they are legally right, because fighting is too expensive and too stressful. The bill passed both chambers of the legislature and was signed into law by the governor. It was not as dramatic as the first signing. There was no ceremony, just a routine approval along with several other bills, but it was still meaningful. Colorado now had some of the strongest protections for homeowners against HOA overreach in the entire country. Life in Meadowbrook Hills continued peacefully. The neighborhood had settled into a comfortable rhythm under the reformed HOA. There were still occasional disputes. That is inevitable when you have hundreds of families living in close proximity. But they were handled reasonably and did not escalate into the kind of conflict that had defined the Patricia Henderson era. My clothesline remained in my backyard, a simple retractable line that most people would not even notice unless they were looking for it. But for me, it represented something much bigger than just a way to dry laundry. It was a symbol of standing up for rights, fighting institutional overreach, and creating positive change. Every time I hung clothes on that line, I remembered the journey I had been through and felt proud of how I had handled it. The financial savings from using the clothesline had added up significantly over the years. I calculated that I had saved well over $1,000 in electricity costs, not counting the reimbursement from the HOA and Patricia for the damaged equipment. But more valuable than the money was the principle. I had the right to make sustainable choices on my own property, and no HOA could take that away from me. Jennifer Ortiz built a thriving practice and became one of the leading HOA attorneys in Colorado. She continued to take on cases involving homeowner rights, and she won most of them. She told me that my case had been a turning point in her career, giving her the confidence and credibility to take on more ambitious advocacy work. "You made it possible for me to help dozens of other homeowners," Jennifer said during one of our occasional lunches. "Every time I cite the right to dry statute or the anti-retaliation law, I think about your clothesline and Patricia Henderson's ridiculous overreach." Elizabeth Adams's solar panels generated enough electricity to power her entire house, with excess going back into the grid. She calculated that they would pay for themselves in about 7 years, after which she would essentially have free electricity for the life of the panels. More neighbors followed her example, and Meadowbrook Hills became known in Colorado Springs as one of the more environmentally progressive neighborhoods. Ironically, given how it had all started with an HOA trying to ban a clothesline. Robert Mills served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down to let someone else take over. The new president, a retired engineer named Thomas Wright, continued the collaborative, reasonable approach that Robert had established. The HOA focused on its legitimate functions like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and handling neighborhood infrastructure, while avoiding petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. I remained friendly with most of my neighbors, and the Clothesline story became part of neighborhood lore. New residents would hear about it and sometimes come by to see the famous clothesline that had sparked such a conflict. I would show them the simple retractable line in my backyard and tell them the whole story. Most people were shocked that something so minor had escalated so dramatically, but they understood the principle at stake. The case also had ripple effects beyond Colorado. After the laws passed, and the story got some national attention, homeowners in other states started pushing for similar protections. I was contacted by advocates in Texas, Florida, Arizona, and several other states who were working on right-to-dry legislation or HOA reform. I shared my story, provided copies of the Colorado statutes, and offered whatever help I could. Some of those efforts succeeded, while others stalled in state legislatures. But the national conversation about HOA power and homeowner rights continued to grow. More people were recognizing that the balance had shifted too far toward HOA control, and that reforms were needed to protect individual property rights. My life moved on in other ways too. I got a promotion at work, traveled to interesting places, and pursued hobbies that had nothing to do with HOAs or clotheslines. But the experience remained an important part of my story, a time when I had stood up for something I believed in and made a difference. Looking back on the whole saga, from that first certified letter to the passage of state legislation protecting homeowners, I felt a sense of accomplishment. It had been stressful, frustrating, and sometimes scary. Patricia Henderson's vandalism had been genuinely disturbing, and the months of conflict with the HOA had taken an emotional toll. But I had stood my ground, fought smart with legal help and documentation, and ultimately prevailed. The clothesline still hung in my backyard as the years passed, a quiet reminder that individual rights matter, that sustainability is worth fighting for, and that no one has the right to dictate unreasonable rules on someone else's property. I used it regularly, enjoying the fresh smell of sun-dried laundry and the satisfaction of knowing I was reducing my environmental impact. Patricia Henderson's name faded from neighborhood conversation. New residents had no idea who she was, and even longtime residents rarely mentioned her. She had become a cautionary tale, an example of what happens when HOA board members forget they are supposed to serve the community rather than control it. The reforms that followed the clothesline incident made Meadowbrook Hills a better place to live. The HOA functioned more transparently, residents felt more empowered, and the neighborhood maintained its appearance and property values without heavy-handed enforcement of petty rules. It turned out that people would take care of their properties and respect reasonable community standards without needing an HOA president to threaten them with fines. In the end, my clothesline dispute taught me that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is difficult. It showed me that individuals can create change, that laws are only as good as the people willing to defend them, and that sometimes the biggest battles are fought over seemingly small issues like where you dry your laundry. My choice to hang clothes in my backyard had led to arrests, legislative changes, and a neighborhood transformation, all because I believed I had the right to make sustainable choices on my own property without interference from an overreaching HOA.